Start. How we go? There we go. Okay, so we're going to talk about the chicken conundrum, right? Because we all talk about animal agriculture. We all talk about the health impacts of eating animals, the ecological impacts, and what we often hear repeatedly is, hey, we should switch from beef to poultry, to chickens, and eating those, right? And that's this conundrum that we always face. So let's explore that a little bit and talk about the scientific information regarding health and environment with regards to poultry production and consumption, all right? So as mentioned, I'm a physician. I did my residency in family medicine, but I now practice emergency medicine, and I do some volunteer work abroad in Haiti more recently and India in the past. So I'm interested in human well-being, animal well-being, and environment altogether. I co-founded this website, which I hope that you will all check out. It amalgamates research regarding plant versus animal foods or products, whatever you want to call them, and the environmental impact, health, the zoonosis, economies, economic issues. I recommend people to maybe at first go and see our videos, and second, go to our summaries before you delve into what we call the library, or the big database with all the articles, which is a little bit, it's a lot of stuff there, but I would see the videos and go to the summaries first, okay? Recently, we co-authored this article, which I'm still going to revise a little bit, but right now there's a big, huge push towards this kind of greenwashing and fake news about regenerative grazing. And that's what we hear. We hear a lot of incomplete information. We hear a lot of fake news that's out there. And some of that fake news gets a lot of press and has a lot of money behind it. They can make movies and hire researchers to kind of tell their story, similar to how tobacco has done, alcohol has done, and the fossil fuel industry is doing as well. Okay, there's a similar process happening there. And it also affects the way we view other animal products in terms of their impact. Also, there's this problem where people are just looking at part of the information, not looking at the full picture of the information, and also not wanting to do so because people are very bonded to eating animals. So we're going to do a big picture review of the data regarding animal agriculture, including the birds that people breed, the ecological impact, health impact, zoonosis, and talk about sustainable protein. All right. Now, when I talk about the environment, the global environment, the first thing I do is I talk about humans. Okay. And to understand the impact of animal agriculture, I think we need to understand what's happening on Earth with humans, okay? So the world population is very large, okay? If we have more than 7 billion people on the planet, and we just grow at 1%, that means we add 1 billion people to the planet every 10 to 12 years. Right now, we're almost 8 billion people. And we can expect another 1 billion people on the planet in just over 10 years, okay? And considering all the things that people consume in terms of material things, land, water, and food, this adds up, okay? So we're gonna have 10 billion people to feed by 2050, and it's very, very important that we manage to feed everybody, especially the global poor, who are the most insecure and suffer the most from environmental problems that are created by the global rich. There's a lot of extreme poverty on Earth. That's people who, in their family, each person, if you average the income, it's less than $1.90 per day per person in the family. And about 800 million just before COVID. And after COVID, there's probably another 150 to 200 million people more that live under extreme poverty conditions, like close to 1 billion people. And so many people, again, these are pre-COVID numbers, who suffer from severe food shortages, meaning they don't get enough calories to eat. And how many people suffer from conflict, and how many modern slaves there are. There are more slaves under the modern definition now than there were during times of slavery in the past, okay? And moderate poverty, 4.2 billion people pre-COVID that fit definitions of moderate poverty. That's That's incredible in this day and age, okay? And if you're part of the global rich, if you make more than $32,000 US per year, per person in your family, you're part of the 1%. A lot of people don't know that. So if you look back 10,000 years, humans were one of many vertebrate species on land, and we were just like less than 1% of the biomass, the total weight of all vertebrate animals, every animal that had a spine on Earth, okay? Humans were less than 1% of that weight because there were so many other animals in such large numbers. But currently, if you look at the numbers, humans have increased our population and our mass so much. And 10,000 years ago, we didn't have livestock, but now we have livestock. So the animals that we breed make up about 2/3 of the biomass on Earth in terms of terrestrial vertebrate animals. Humans make up about 1/3, and wild animals make up about 1%. Now, this is according to one scientist, Vaclav Smil, and his calculations. There are others who have calculated, a more recent study shows that, hey, maybe humans and livestock are about 96% of biomass, and wild mammals are about 4% of biomass. But you can see it's in the same order of magnitude. And if you look at just chickens on Earth, that's one species of bird that didn't exist in the wild, but have been bred into existence by humans. They outweigh all wild birds, 15 to 20,000 species of wild birds. Depends on how you define species, the number you get. But they outweigh all those wild birds by 3 times. So it's incredible the scale that humans have taken over the environment. And just the story of biomass gives you part of that picture. From 1970 to 2017, if you measure, if you look at the animal populations that are measured by the WWF and Royal Society UK, you find that those animal populations, on average, have dropped by about 70% by 2017 and further. There's a very rapid decline in animal populations. Now, it's mixed. Some populations have actually increased and others have decreased drastically. But there, you could see that there are many, many species that are in severe and rapid decline, okay, because of humans changing the Earth. And the ones that are increasing are also increasing because somehow they survive more in an environment that has been changed by humans. Humans have changed 75% of the land-based environment, 2/3 of the ocean environment, taken over 3/4 of all accessible fresh water for our crop and livestock use. That's our major use of water. And we've increased crop production so much since the past few decades. And now out of that 75% that I mentioned of the Earth's land that has been altered by humans, that's the non-frozen surface of the Earth, 40 to 50% of the total non-frozen surface of the Earth is used for agriculture. Okay, conservatively 40, but it may be a bit more. There's a bit of a gray area too. And the vast majority of that is used for grazing animals. So ruminant animals, cattle, sheep, goats, like that, okay? And 10 to 15% of the Earth's land is used for growing crops, but half of those crops are used to feed animals. And only between 5 to 10% of the Earth's land grows crops for direct human consumption. Probably around maybe 6 to 7% realistically. And animal agriculture still, despite using all this land, provides only 40% of the protein eaten by humans. 60%, or maybe a little bit more than 60%, according to a more recent study, is actually from plant foods that use this very small amount of land in comparison. And consequently, there's this differing environmental impact. This is United Nations data expressed in this graph by Our World in Data, looking at the numbers I just talked about. And I talked about the protein, 37% of protein comes from animal agriculture, according to the data that they're using. And for calories, it's only 18% of human consumed calories are from animal-based foods, and the rest, 82%, are from plant-based foods, okay? So the world's biomass, that means mostly forest, has been cut in half by humans. We've deforested about half the Earth. And of everything green that grows on Earth, about 25% of that is controlled by humans in the forms of the agriculture that we have, okay? And we are also still deforesting so much for timber use and mainly to clear farmland for more animals, okay? When you look at the number of animals consumed, that's just land animals. It's 70 to 80 billion land animals per year are slaughtered for human consumption. That's over 2,000 animals per second, and it's mostly chickens, okay? Monogastric animals, animals with one stomach, chicken, pigs, and other birds, okay, they make up the majority of the animals. As I mentioned, though, it's chickens is still the biggest. And what they eat is they eat grain, they eat soy, they eat oil seeds. Oil seeds refers a lot to soy, actually, and some other things that we press oil, we get some of the oil from them, and we feed the rest to the animals, or we just grow them and feed the whole thing to animals. They contain a lot of protein and calories. And then, you know, corn and other grains are fed to these animals too. Ruminants create more methane compared to monogastrics. Monogastrics do create some methane because of their poop, but ruminants much more because of their ruminating process in their GI tract. And that's cattle, goats, buffalo. They have a different digestive system. They can graze and they can eat the same things like grains, soy, oil seeds, but they also eat plant matter like hay and silage and the cellulose plant matter because they can digest that. Now, as a result of human activity, we have this mass extinction that's going on globally. We estimate about 1 million species are threatened out of an 11 million total estimated species, including insects. And it's not just the extinction of species, which is complex. It's not just, you know, the total of extinction of species, but it can be extinction of a species from a region, from an area, and from a continent. For, you know, so there's local and regional extinctions as well as total extinctions, as well as what we call functional extinctions. You've eliminated, let's say, most of a certain species from the environment, and it no longer fulfills its environmental role. That's a functional extinction. But we're also seeing the extinction and collapse of entire ecosystems. And animal agriculture is, you know, the biggest or one of the biggest, you know, top 2 or 3 causes, you know, it could be, because it is the largest user of land on Earth. When we use land for animal agriculture, we completely change it from the natural ecosystem, okay? And it uses so much land, right? And that's the single largest land used by any industry is animal agriculture. Now, there are multiple causes. We can't just blame it on one thing. There's this massive population. There's land fragmentation through human societies developing everywhere, roads being built everywhere, mining, materials economy, pollution, you know, all these things. So there's these combined effects, but animal agriculture is a big part of this process. And what we have is this kind of ecological genocide. That's what I call it. So now let's go to some more details about why animals take so much land. Now, if somebody, a human, an animal, is eating food, you don't just eat 1 gram of protein and it becomes 1 gram of muscle, right? Protein into your muscles. We metabolize a lot of that protein, and we use it in different ways in the body, and only a fraction of it will become a part of the body of somebody who's already an adult, or if they're growing from a baby, then they will incorporate only a part of the protein that is consumed. Now, we call this a feed conversion ratio. How many calories does it take to be consumed to then become a calorie of an edible calorie into an animal, let's say, okay? How many calories of plant foods or other foods do they eat to become 1 calorie consumable after that animal is then consumed by humans? That's a feed conversion ratio. But we can also look at the protein conversion ratio. That's part of the feed conversion ratio as well. And for, let's say, chickens, it takes 3 to 6 kilograms of protein consumed to become 1 kilogram of chicken flesh, protein in the form of chicken flesh that is consumable. Okay, like I said, much of it is metabolized for other uses, and some of it also becomes non-edible products like feathers and skin and stuff like that, which is typically not eaten. Okay, and so you're having a loss at the very, very most optimal. You know, 2/3 of the protein fed to the chicken is lost, is wasted, and 1/3 is retained. Now, I don't think it's very common that people always achieve the maximum efficiency, right? In most cases, probably they don't. In many cases, there's various amounts of chickens who are being fed who eventually die before they can be slaughtered and put to market. There's all kinds of waste kind of along that chain of events. And in many cases, we also hear these mass die-offs of animals that are being farmed because there's some infection spreading amongst the farm, and they'll literally, kill hundreds of thousands or millions of these animals to stop the spread of the infection and so forth. So these are things that are not factored into the numbers and will actually decrease the efficiency. Yes, cow flesh is the least efficient. Okay, ruminants, goats, cattle, they have the worst feed conversion ratios. Okay, and that's why they take up the most amount of land. And when they're grazed, they have even less efficiency and take up even more land. And that's why they're the worst for the environment. But that doesn't mean that chickens aren't taking up a disproportionate amount of resources to feed them. Same with the story for eggs, and the same story for dairy. They're more efficient than other forms of meat, but they're certainly not efficient compared to direct consumption of plant foods, which is 100% efficient. You grow, let's say a kilogram of protein, and then you can eat that kilogram of protein, right? And we see that, insects and farmed fish, again, they have their maximum efficiency is around that of chickens. So when people say, oh, we should eat insects, or people say we should eat farmed fish, they're actually not more efficient than plants. You're still getting about this 2/3 or worse wastage. That's the maximum efficiency you can have. Okay, so I just wanted to get through that because this is a very important concept, this feed conversion ratio. So, yes, chickens and let's say dairy, eggs, insects, they are more efficient compared to cattle and ruminants, but they still have, they're still inefficient compared to direct consumption of plants. Okay, now there's two types of land that are used for raising animals, and ruminants can graze or be at pasture, but they can also eat the crops that I mentioned, and those oil seeds, grains, and so forth. That uses farmland. So you have to grow this stuff on farmland to feed the animals. So there's this land. Okay. Now, okay. So as I mentioned, compared to what is eating chicken flesh better, but compared to what, right? If we take all the land which currently grows feed for chickens and for other animals too, including like pigs and whatnot, and we just converted most of that to growing plant food for humans, maybe some of it is a little bit less suitable, but most of it can probably be suitable because there are so many different human plant foods with different characteristics and can grow. You can always find different kinds of plants that will grow more efficiently in different circumstances. You could grow a lot more food for humans, okay, on a smaller amount of land. So legumes and whole grains are much more efficient protein sources as compared to chickens, eggs, dairy, and so forth. Now, how do the animals get that efficient in the first place? They are bred. Okay, breeding animals, over hundreds of years, and especially over the last decades, we've become so good at breeding animals. That is a form of genetic modification. Breeding is indeed a form of genetic modification. Now we also have direct gene modification, which is also being done, and that has gotten us to these levels of 3-to-1 efficiency, which is not really seen in animals. Most animals in nature, they're not that efficient, and the original animals from which the chickens were bred were not that efficient. Other birds are not that efficient. Okay, so there's breeding, but despite all this breeding, we reach sort of a peak of efficiency over the last, let's say, 20, 30 years. We haven't gotten more efficient than this 3-to-1 ratio where we max out. So 50% of the world's crops are fed to animals. Chickens take 3 to 4 times land compared to protein foods that you can directly feed humans, especially soy being one of the most efficient protein foods. Okay, so eating animals will take more land, as we mentioned, and this will cause more deforestation, more ecosystem disruption. out of the Amazon, which is being destroyed at a very rapid rate, some of the soy products go to feeding chickens as well. It's not just cattle that's there. There's more pesticides, more antibiotics, more soil loss because we're using more land. We're aggressively using this land for this inefficient process, more water, and more greenhouse gas emissions too. Now, when we talk about backyard or traditional farm chickens, apparently there was a presentation about this already, they are probably going to be more efficient than cattle, but they're not more efficient than factory farmed chickens as well, because in the factory farm condition, there's very tight regulation of input, output, restriction on activities. Chickens are not running around and burning calories, so that makes them grow more efficiently as well. They can do other things like maintain certain temperatures, turn on the lights at certain times, and so forth. So backyard chickens do eat some forage foods. They'll go around and eat some bugs and grubs and some little plant matter and so forth, but they're still being fed grains. And overall, they're probably being fed more and therefore are less efficient compared to factory farming. So this idea of backyard farming is not more efficient on a large scale compared to factory farming. Okay, and it's not an overall solution. Yes, in certain places, like when I go to Haiti, there is not access to the supply chain of factory farmed animals. So people do have some, backyard chickens and so forth. It's very common over there. It's not that this is more efficient, it's just that this is the only thing that is locally available. But when hundreds of thousands of people are doing it, they're probably losing protein as they feed grain to these animals. The more grain that they feed to the animals, the more that they're actually losing in terms of how much they could have consumed. Okay, and heritage breeds of chickens are even less efficient than the modern breeds. So these heritage chickens do not have the efficient feed conversion ratios as compared to the numbers that I showed you. Also, there are environmental consequences, such as killing off predators and other competitive animals from the environment when you have backyard chickens. That's only one of the environmental outcomes, but it's an obvious one, right? You're going to kill off anything that might hurt your chickens. And this is one of the reasons that as people spread over the globe, they especially kill predator animals, and it's one of the major losses of biodiversity. Okay, and what if we just eat eggs? You mentioned that the 3 to 4 kilogram of plant protein to make 1 kilogram of egg protein. So the same issues on the environment and loss of plant foods, loss of plant protein, relative loss of plant protein compared to how much you could consume just eating the plant. And as I mentioned, these are notes from a first world country. There are different circumstances in different places. I'm not going to go to Haiti and tell people to be plant-based all of a sudden, right? I can promote sustainable plant foods that can grow in the environment there and are culturally acceptable and can also become more culturally acceptable over time. But this is a process, right? So we don't want to suggest that as people in developed countries who may be plant-based or vegan, that we can just automatically assume that everybody in the world can do it all at once. Okay, there's a lot of considerations here, and I just want to recognize that. Okay, but over time, there are many people in developing countries, and food security of developing countries would probably increase greatly by becoming much more plant-based over time, and organized, sort of efficient, scientifically plant-based in terms of how these plant-based foods are grown, especially legumes and pulses, which can provide so much protein, use less water, are healthier, and also add nitrogen to the soil just by growing them. Okay, so grazing uses the largest amount of land and is the biggest cause of biodiversity loss, right? But legumes and whole grains are still much more efficient than eating poultry birds, and we would save a lot of farmland, which could be used to increase food security, and probably would still have extra farmland left over if we switch to more plant-based foods, which could be rewilded, turned back into original forest or ecosystems. Okay. Now, when it comes to food security and food justice, Again, ruminants are the worst, but we still are inefficient with our poultry. And a lot of the world's soya and grains are used to feed animals. And much of this food then is lost for human consumption, and especially taken away from the global poor. Okay, so much of the food that we grow could be used to feed the global poor, especially when we have farming operations in developing countries, or grow feed in developing countries and export that feed to a developed country to feed animals there for people to then eat. Okay, now if grains are and plant proteins are directly eaten by people, there is definitely enough for people worldwide. But meat diverts food, land, and water from the global poor to the global rich. That increased demand also increases prices and makes it less affordable. There's a lot of land grabbing and displacement of people, and biofuels cause much of the same problem by taking land away from farmland away from humans. And then using that land for purposes that just mostly benefit the global rich. Okay. Water use. Okay. Again, to grow all these plants to feed animals, we're going to use more water. 70% of the world's water is used for agriculture, and much of it, and 50% of all crops. So 70% of the world's water is used for agriculture, mostly for crop farming, but 50% of the world's crops are fed to animals, okay? And much of that goes to growing chickens. So, there's also a large percentage for biodiesel, and, probably, like I mentioned, about 6% of soy. When you just look at soy, it's only about 6% that's for direct human consumption, okay? And much of that is just oil. So the protein that people consume for soy is actually a very small percentage of the total soy crop production around the world, okay? So when people say, hey, soy is bad for the environment, you shouldn't drink soy milk, that's not true. Most of the soy is used for purposes other than for feeding humans, okay? All right. Now, when we look at greenhouse gas from animal agriculture, you can see at the top, beef grown is a herd, like through grazing animals, has the largest amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's these, goat and sheep. Prawns actually take a lot of fuel and cause a lot of climate change. And then there's beef, the dairy herd. Now, the reason for these greenhouse gas emissions is partly through deforestation and release of greenhouse gas, because there's ongoing deforestation to create more land to feed these animals, but also due to the methane that is emitted by these ruminant animals. Now you can see that pigs and fish and poultry meat are lower on that chain of greenhouse gas emissions, but look further down that chain and you'll see grains, but then going down, you see pulses and peas and nuts and the plant-based sources of protein causing a very minuscule amount of greenhouse gas emissions compared to poultry meat. So yes, people can say switch from beef to chicken, but switching from chicken to pulses creates less greenhouse gas emissions. And we need every bit of gain, of improvement that we can get right now with things being the way they are. And remember, it's not just about climate change. It's also about decreased land use, also about decreased water use, also about increased food security, as in the previous slides, okay? Here's another slide showing that the practices vary depending on how people grow beef and the circumstances. There may be more or less greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to just put my cursor over here, and you can see that, under the best circumstances, there's a few producers who can, get the beef emissions to being pretty low, but, a lot of them are around here, and then a lot of them are sort of up here. Okay, we have these higher amounts, and it averages out kind of high. Same with all these other animals. There's a spectrum of greenhouse gas emissions. But when you come to growing beans and peas and nuts, sometimes it could be a little bit higher, but sometimes you can actually get it to zero and even a little bit of negative emissions. So in some circumstances, you truly can get negative emissions. Now, the beef industry likes to fake it, and they're kind of lying about and fudging the data about, and saying that, oh, we can store carbon in the ground by having this regenerative grazing the so-called regenerative grazing. It's not true. That's another presentation to itself. But it's the plant foods that can truly store carbon, especially nuts, because you start growing trees and they're going to store a lot of carbon if you grow trees in a place where they didn't have the trees already. Now, what are we going to do? If we switch to plant-based foods and using less water, we're creating less greenhouse gases, we are using far less land. Especially this last point that I made, using less land to grow the same amount of protein. You're going to have land that you no longer need to farm because you're growing your food and creating this protein much more efficiently. You'll have extra land and you can allow that land to become wild again. You can rewild the land. And that is the critical environmental take-home point from switching from eating animals to eating the best plant-based sources of protein. Okay, so when we use this less land, we can grow back forests or wetlands or whatever the word. Not only do we improve on climate change, but we restore ecosystems and we increase biodiversity. And biodiversity has been tremendously impacted by the animal agriculture industry, as I mentioned. Now, let's talk about health. Okay, people say, hey, I don't eat beef, I just eat chicken. You see these recommendations all the time. Red and processed meat do have the worst impacts on health. Realistically, they do, okay? But animal products do collectively have an impact on mortality, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, dementia. Now, remember, a lot of chicken products are processed foods, chicken nuggets and Kentucky Fried Chicken. Those are what should be KFC actually, those are forms of processed meat. But when people say, the regular poultry products are healthier than beef, fine, they're healthier than beef, but compared to what is the question, right? Yes, so compared to beef, they are healthy, but not compared to the optimal plant-based foods. Now, I'm just going to go through a couple of studies here. This is a recent one published in 2021, showing that red meat and processed meat indeed were the worst for health in this study, in this large population study that was following about 500,000 people for about 8 years in the UK. But poultry meat did, compared to plant foods, increase ischemic heart disease, diabetes, diverticulitis, gallbladder disease, some increase in osteoarthritis. It affects joints. You get more arthritis because you're affecting your blood vessels and healthy blood flow to your joints, right? So by eating products with cholesterol and saturated fats, et cetera. And, before adjusting for body mass index, now this is a bit complicated, but there are increases in things like atrial fibrillation, which is a heart condition, fibroids, and diverticulitis as well. So these things do increase with poultry products compared to plant products. Maybe it's better than the processed meat and better than the red meat, but still a problem, okay? And again, there's increased cancer of certain types with red meat, but also poultry meat was found to increase prostate cancer and lymphoma and so forth. And I think if we fine-tune these studies and we really compare to the optimal plant-based foods, you'd find even a greater difference between the optimal plant foods and these type of animal products. So there are another couple of studies that I'm going through right here, showing again, there's just decreased lifespan, increased mortality while eating animal products, and this includes poultry meat, but increasing plant protein intake showed, those people who eat the most plant protein had lower mortality compared to those who ate the least, okay? And there's adjusted data, and then there's various unadjusted data for sort of less adjusted data, and we're not going to get into all those complications, but suffice to say that there's an advantage of eating healthy plant protein sources. Association of major dietary protein sources with all-cause and cause-specific mortality. Again, eating eggs was actually found to be one of the, have a very large impact on people's lifespan and increasing mortality. Okay, and Yeah, okay, so I was going to go from there. Okay, let's skip through some of these papers. Okay. Again, showing, this one again shows that, plant protein reduces rates of dementia and cardiovascular disease. Poultry may a little bit too, but again, that's compared to baseline diet where people are eating a lot of meat. Now, the next topic I'm going to go into is zoonotic diseases. Okay. Now, we talked about the impact on the environment and how many animals there are slaughtered per year. I should also mention about fish. There's about 1 to 2 trillion fish slaughtered per year. The numbers are somewhere around there, and that's 30 to 60,000 fish per second. And that's why there's such a tremendous impact on ocean ecosystems by fish. And a lot of people will say that, hey, this is not a fish presentation. People say, hey, you should switch to eating fish because fish don't cause as much greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, that's because you're not talking about the impact on the ocean itself. And the fishing industry is devastating the ocean. So we could do a similar presentation about fish and show why people say it's better to eat fish for the environment, but it's actually not, because it's just simply that they're not measuring the impact on the ocean. Now, when you have 80 billion animals that you're breeding and slaughtering per year, that's a very, very large biomass. And as we mentioned, this exceeds the biomass of wild animals, right? Of all wild birds put together. So now when we congregate chickens, when you're growing chickens in these large farms, sometimes they're small farms and you have like maybe tens or hundreds of chickens, but sometimes the farms reach capacities of the millions. And even in these backyard farms, they're still all in contact with each other. We're breeding so many of these animals. So when they catch viruses from wild animals and they get into those wild animals, these viruses will spread amongst the livestock. Okay, in this case, let's talk about chickens. So influenza virus, for example, is found in wild birds like ducks and waterfowl. It's a gastrointestinal virus, and it's not harmful in nature and under natural conditions to those animals. It sort of lives with those animals from generation to generation. Doesn't spread a lot, but passes from one family member to another family member and kind of lives in harmony most of the time. Now, some mutations may occur, and let's say a dangerous mutation was to occur in that virus, and let's say it killed off the family of ducks on a lake. Basically, that family of ducks will die, but then the virus will die too, because it's not going to be able to spread itself very easy to other ducks. Ducks are mostly kind of social distance from each other, right? They spread all around the world and they're in much smaller numbers. But when this influenza virus went from ducks to our domesticated animals, poultry and some other animals, then you have these conditions where you have hundreds or thousands or as I said, millions of birds congregated together, and the virus spreads amongst this very large captive population. And now you have so many animals infected, there's a higher rate of mutations just because the number of animals and the biomass of infected sort of tissue in all of these animals. You have a higher chance of mutations, you have some higher chance of a bad mutation. But now when a bad mutation in nature will not be able to spread, under the factory farm condition, it has lots of other animals right beside it to spread to. And so when you get a very sick animal, it may spew a bunch of virus and then infect other animals around it. The original animal may die, but it was still able to infect other animals. And then you get this, propagation of bad viruses spreading amongst these animals. This in turn causes sickness amongst the animals. And over time, you get more and more mutations. Some of those mutations will start wiping out the population of farmed birds. And that's what happens when I mentioned that, they'll try to, exterminate all these birds on a farm because they don't want this bad virus to spread any further. But in some cases, these mutations can then spill over into humans. Okay, so we get this process. You get this wild animals may transmit some viruses to our domesticated animals, influenza being one example, but there are others. And then an amplification and mutation that happens in the livestock because of the huge number of confined animals. Okay, this also happens in wet markets because you have huge numbers of confined animals. And when you have multiple species, that also increases the rate of mutation as a virus passes from chickens to pigs and back to chickens and to other animals too. You get increased rates of mutation. Okay, so with all of these mutations, some of those mutations can spill over into humans because you get some mutations that can infect humans. And that's why we get the annual flu. And I always get my flu shot every year because as a physician, I don't want to spread the flu to more vulnerable people. Okay. But in some cases, you can get very, very dangerous forms of influenza or other virus. And that can then cause severe illness and death in humans. Okay. So the key concepts here are that, in the wild animals, there's a high biodiversity of animals, but a high biodiversity of viruses as well. And these animals often, overlap in terms of our domesticated animals and their spillover. And then there's this process of amplification and mutations, which then can spill over into humans. Okay. And livestock serves as an intermediate host for these viruses. Okay. Now, this is a diagram from one paper here, this 2012 paper that occurred well before COVID-19, okay? Here's another paper talking about the same process and with different nuances, okay? And talking about the next pandemic. And that's from the Lancet Medical Journal. These are not fringe medical journals by any means. And again, more and more medical journals talking about this process, especially after COVID-19. And there's a little bit of a theory that, hey, maybe COVID-19 came from a lab in China, but the majority of the evidence points to the role of wet markets. Even if it, escaped from a lab, it might have gone to a wet market, amplified and mutated there, and then gotten into humans. But most likely, it just went from bats to animals in the wet market, and there's many sort of mutations occurring amongst those animals, and then the viral variant or the strain of virus that infected humans probably came from pangolins, because that's the closest genetic related virus that we found amongst any animals or found amongst the lab compared to COVID-19. Okay, so there's this process of creating pandemics through breeding animals or collecting animals together in wet markets. So factory farming, there's influenza A, which is one that's very dangerous to humans in certain mutations. There's the 1918 Spanish flu, H1N1, and 40 million deaths worldwide and 500 million infected, like basically a third of the human population at the time in the world. So it had a very high mortality and infection rate. And in 1957, 1968, 2009, there were other outbreaks. 2009, I was working as an ER doctor during the H1N1 outbreak, and that caused many deaths, not as much as COVID-19, but there was one young girl who died, and was brought to our emergency department. So going through that. Now, again, this 2014 paper clearly shows the relationship between these wild birds having a virus getting into our domesticated poultry birds and into other animals as well that we breed, and then spreading around different animals and even spreading back to wild animals, becoming dangerous for them. Okay, so again, this is a very well-known mechanism that our domesticated livestock and wet markets and so forth are a breeding ground for viruses. Okay, so COVID-19 is most likely caused by this process. We know that Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome and SARS-CoV-2 SARS coronavirus 2002 were caused by this process, H1N1, but also HIV, Ebola, Spanish flu. These were also caused by forms of animal agriculture. Going back further, smallpox and certain forms of tuberculosis are also caused by animal agriculture. You can see this podcast for a lot more details about this issue. And it's something that we should all know about. It's hardly talked about in the media, but the whole animal agriculture industry is going to bring us more dangerous viruses and likely more pandemics, and they can be worse than COVID-19. And that the poultry birds, chickens, may have lesser environmental impact and lesser health impact from consumption compared to red meat and processed meat, but they have a much higher risk of creating pandemics because of that sheer number of confined animals, okay? So those are some of the main points. Sorry, I wasn't as smooth as I wanted to be when delivering some of that information, but I wouldn't be lulled into comparing poultry products only to red and processed meats. Yes, they are somewhat, less worse for your health, okay, compared to those, and less bad for the environment. But compared to the optimal plant foods, they have a higher impact on health, ecology, food security, and also zoonosis, which we must consider, okay? So whole food, plant-based is going to be the best food that we can eat. And I also really want to emphasize here that there's a lot of vegan or plant-based junk food that's out there. And a lot of this plant-based junk food is as bad as meat is for people's health, and sometimes as bad as the worst forms of meat. So I don't want people who are plant-based and vegans to be lulled into a sense of complacency where they're eating a lot of unhealthy plant-based foods. And these unhealthy plant-based foods, they don't give you any nutrition per se, yet they do extract from the environment. So they basically have an environmental impact with no nutrition benefit. So they're a complete waste when it comes, to thinking about the environment. So I really want people who are plant-based, people who are vegan, to focus on whole food, plant-based diets in an optimal way, and take your B12. Let's do it right, because that truly will be best for health and truly best for the environment, okay, compared to eating, the junk food plant-based stuff, which is not good for either, okay? Now, there's a lot more information coming out from organizations like the Eat Lancet Project, which talks about making our global diet mostly plant-based, and that this would be best for food security, global health, as well as the environment, okay? And gives a very small sort of portion to animal products in its sort of dietary food guide, and says also in the report that, these are kind of optional things. And yes, of course, there are some people who are more dependent on them, but in most places in developing countries, plant-based foods still form the majority of protein and calories that people can consume, okay? And that can be done better still, okay? So please go to my website, Plant-Based Data, check out some of the presentations there. I do a environment presentation there, which I think is a little bit more concise than what I just gave right now, but I think it's really good. And we have sections there on pandemics and health as well, which I'd really love for you to see our economics and policy section too. All right. And shout out to our friend Greta, and I guess young leaders around the world who are making the connection between all life, the well-being of all life, our human health, the environment, pandemics, and so much more. There's more to it than just what I've expressed, and we want to take in all aspects. Okay, so with that, I think I'll wrap up, and then we can maybe field a few questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. There we go, and let's see what time it is. How long did I take? Oh my God, we've used up most of our time. I hope we still have a little bit of time for questions at least.
I have time. If you have time, I would love to be able to do a couple of questions. Yeah, if that's okay with you.
Sure, let's go for it.
Okay, first of all, just thank you so much. I mean, it's really, I'm sure everybody feels the same. Like I kept wanting to sort of pause to take it in because it's so much amazing information. So I was just taking screenshots or taking pictures of the screen so I could basically, I mean, the way you wrapped it up, there's just so many issues that are so connected. And thank you for tying so much together and showing how connected all of these issues are. So, I mean, if I can ask, so I don't, we don't have any questions in the Q&A box right now. So please, y'all add your questions, and I will keep looking at Facebook to see if we have any questions, but I have a couple of questions if it's okay. I mean, I guess, the whole conversation about pandemics and being rooted in animal agriculture, really, like, I mean, if we took out, I mean, obviously, right, you're saying that that the viruses start in wild animal populations, but if we took out that intermediary host, like if we eliminated animal agriculture, would we eliminate pandemics?
Well, I don't think we can easily answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's always the chance that we can get a virus from ourselves, because there's 8 billion humans and we're breeding our own viruses amongst ourselves and creating variants. We've seen that with coronavirus, right? We got infected by a version of COVID-19. And that likely happened through the wet markets in Wuhan, the Hunan wet market in China. That's probably where it came from, through pangolins, right? That's the closest virus that we found, much more close than those that were at the lab that they're talking about and everything like that. It's partly kind of a political thing that they're upset about right now that feeds into this lab theory, I think. But then we've seen this virus spread amongst humans. And we've seen multiple genetic variations all over the world. There's good papers on that. And now there's this Delta variant, that's something that was created in humans, because you have a mass of humans who are infected. They're spreading it around all the time. The virus, the virus has a certain baseline rate of mutation, and the more people infected, the more mutations you'll get. You simply have more viruses. And then we get these different variants, and the Delta variant being the most recent one that's spreading faster, right, and causing trouble again. So there's those kind of pandemics we can get. We can also get pandemics maybe from wild animals, that like some novel virus that not so much, there's never been much human exposure, but somehow a human gets exposed. But that's going to be very rare. Okay, that's going to be very rare, because our contact with wild animals shouldn't be that much. Right? We shouldn't be in direct contact with wild animals so much. Okay, people may create a lab virus. Who knows? That may actually happen. But by and large, our biggest risk is through animal agriculture, and HIV and Ebola come from wild animals to humans. But that's because, again, mass trade in bushmeat that happens in the African continent, where people are hunting primates and forest antelope and bats, right? And then some of these animals have Ebola, some of them have HIV. And when it came, for example, in HIV, people were repeatedly infected over the decades through the bushmeat trade, hunting and butchering these, chimpanzees or other, not just chimpanzees, actually multiple different primate species. And you're getting exposed to blood and so forth. And simian immunodeficiency virus spread into humans multiple times until certain versions became HIV. And there may have been certain mutations amongst the human population to make it also finally into an HIV that really spread amongst humans. So, hunting of wild animals also poses a risk. That is a way that we come into repeated close contact with blood and secretions and to high numbers of animals, right? But yeah, if we reduce animal agriculture, we greatly reduce our future pandemic risk.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And then again, it's like that point that there are so many issues tied up in animal agriculture, like we reduce our health risks so much by eliminating animal agriculture. We reduce the environmental impacts so much. Like there are so many reasons.
Food security, sort of this, transfer of calories and protein from the global poor towards the global rich, which is happening a lot. A lot of the farmland and land resources in developing countries are used to grow things that then go to the global rich. Right, and especially in the form of animal products, right? And the story goes on. The human rights abuses that are involved in land grabbing, the way farm workers are treated. There are a lot of human rights issues for plant-based foods as well as animal-based foods, right? So a lot of plant-based foods may be vegan, but they're not ethically vegan, depending on how they're grown and how people are treated in the process. But these human rights abuses occur much more in the animal agriculture sector, right? Like just even around here, the slaughterhouses are pretty much the worst places that most people can work. But that doesn't exclude plant-based agriculture too. It's something we should think about too.
Right. I think it's that thing that like a vegan world isn't a perfect world, but there is some, it is like having a vegan world is necessary to have it's necessary, but not sufficient, I guess.
Yeah, it's not sufficient. And also if we want that vegan plant-based world, whatever, we want to make it an ethical plant-based or vegan world. So we're going to look at workers' rights, food security, food justice, and all those kind of things in the process, right? We should be always thinking about that at the same time.
Right. Can I ask you one more question about, like you made the point that you wouldn't ask somebody who was experiencing food insecurity, especially in, those parts of the world, like the global South, or, like what are considered those global poor countries. You wouldn't ask those people, or you wouldn't expect those people to go vegan. You wouldn't ask that of them. Obviously people need to eat whatever they can, if their choices are limited. But so it sounds like in the short term, in the immediate term, we can't expect the global poor to be going vegan. But it also sounds like in the long term, that is absolutely the best thing for food security in all areas, not just
or at least in most areas.
Yeah.
Right? We can't necessarily comment on every specific area around the world. We can't necessarily comment on that, right?
Right.
I can just give an example of my experience in working in Haiti. I've been to Haiti like 5 or 6 times now. When I'm there, I'm the odd one out. I'm a vegan, in Haiti, working with a bunch of people. But I work with lovely, amazing, wonderful people who are super supportive, right? Of me when I'm there, and we work together. And I usually cook up huge pots of like Indian like chickpeas dish or kidney beans dish. And I try to use locally available materials to make a big pot when I feed the whole team. Let's say I'll definitely try to cook for the whole team once or twice. We might be out somewhere far away, and we'll bring a big pot with us, and we'll cook on a fire, and I'll make this stuff for them. So the only thing I bring a couple of spices with me, but then everything else I use there are I try to get like locally sourced beans and things that do grow in Haiti, right? But cook it a little bit differently and having a higher proportion of these plant proteins, and then people enjoy it, they love it. And so right now people are worried about violence, they're worried about poverty, they're worried about just being able to eat, to be able to get clean water, to be able to get healthcare. The last thing on their mind is eating plant-based. But at the same time, in Haiti, we still see a lot of people with diabetes, and they don't get access to medications. They have high blood pressure, they don't have access to medications so easily. There's people who, there's lots of farmers who want to grow these things, but there's problems in terms of how the food system works and sort of international dumping into the Haitian market, which depreciates prices, and that local farmers don't have, a good market to sell to. There's problems with food technology and just education around optimizing farming practices and all kinds of things. So there's a good chance that eating more plant-based foods can be done in Haiti because these things do grow there. We could help those farmers, and it would probably help a lot of people's health as well, in a situation where you get the diseases from consuming a lot of these animal products and other products, but you don't have the medications then to treat the problem, right? So having a more plant-based diet there can be helpful. It doesn't mean that they're going to be vegan or anything like that necessarily, but increasing the proportion of these locally grown pulses, beans, and things like that can help the farmers, can help the environment there, and can help health there too. And that's something over time, and can help food security as well. So over time, there can be a lot of potential benefits from having more plant-based proteins there, like that. And that situation exists in many parts of the world where essentially pulses or legumes, right, can be grown in they can grow in all kinds of areas, and they can be grown more sustainably than a lot of the animal agriculture, occurring in many of these areas. So promoting them and getting, good farming techniques of the types of pulses that grow best, whether it's a dry area or a wet area or a hot area or a cold area, in order to be able to produce more protein on less land and have the health benefits too, right? It's complex because we also want to make sure that people get things like B12 and stuff like that, which is very easy in developed countries, harder in subsistence areas. So when I go to India and I give talks, people who are educated, it's very easy for them to get B12. But for those people in a village, they're eating what they're eating, they may be low on it. But that is a fact that's also that also exists for people who eat animal products. People in developing countries generally are low in B12, even if they're having animal products in their diet. And this is part of our health improvement strategies for developing countries includes better micronutrient management and things like that. So anyways, there's many different factors.
Yeah,
we shouldn't oversimplify it,
right?
But what I want to express is that there is a very large role for plant-based foods to play in food security, nutrition, and better environment in developed and developing countries. But you do have to look at the nuances, and you don't want to make just a black and white judgment in every single case.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a question in the Q&A box from Katrina. She says, what do you recommend people do to help with changing the status quo that society is stuck in? I have written my elected officials, but it seems everything is controlled by powerful lobbyists. Even with things like changing USDA dietary recommendations, it seems impossible to change because animal agriculture lobbyists do everything they can to maintain the status quo.
Well, I'm more of a technical person. I'm good at the technical information regarding environmental issues, let's say zoonosis, health and whatnot. So one of the things that I can recommend is that we should be well-versed on the technical information and the resources of technical information. It's one thing to go and say that, hey, plant-based foods reduce diabetes per se. That's one thing to just say that. But it's another thing to say that and then know the academic, articles, the scientific published literature that supports that point of view, and which, parts of the literature are the most important parts in terms of our information regarding, let's say, diabetes and diet. Okay, so I hope that over time, most people are going to be more informed so that when we are doing our advocacy, we are, we're armed with the best knowledge at that time. And I know that the plant-based movement is doing many things. We're doing things to, there's food activism where we present amazing foods. There's, there's all the YouTube videos that are being done. There are people who are doing science. There's nutritionists and doctors and lawyers and all that thing. It's a multi-pronged approach. I would just say find the skill that you're best at and get involved in the way that you're best at getting involved. Try to work with people that you feel are good team players to work with, because that's really important. It always takes teamwork. You want good team players to work with. And at the same time, arm yourself with the best knowledge, whether you're doing, whatever thing you're doing, whether you're cooking foods for people or starting a restaurant or lobbying the government or teaching people about nutrition, be supplied with the best knowledge at the same time. And that's what plant-based data is there for. It's there to help us with that. And whatever we do, we're also going to be an educator. So I want the educators to be, highly educated themselves. So that's my kind of role in this process.
Well, and giving this presentation today to that point is exactly, everybody watching is much more educated and equipped with more knowledge as we go out and do all the, it's that thing, we're all trying to do as much as we possibly can in whatever way we can. And just to that point of that we need to be educated. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And I don't know if there's anything else that you want to say, but I want to try to respect your time. And we are at like almost 12:45. Just like so much incredible information. And we will have the Facebook Live will be up right away on Facebook. This was recorded and I'll get that up on YouTube as soon as possible so that we can share this, because it is really just, such an amazing presentation, just really rich with facts. And, it's just that thing. It seems like, oh, if people just knew, the world would change, right? But I don't know why it's not that simple. But
it's always hard. It's always hard.
Yeah.
So just a couple of parting comments. I'm gonna just say maybe a couple of things. First of all, I just want to give a shout out to my friends in Haiti, who are some of them there during their earthquake right now, and doing a lot of hard work. Remember that as we're trying to express compassion for the environment and compassion for the for animals, to always maintain that for humans too. Sometimes it's tricky for people because we get demoralized by what people are doing, right? But I think that's a really, really key element of the movement, when we respect each other and we respect everybody, even when we disagree with what people are doing or their views or things like that. I think it makes us a stronger movement. You know what I mean? So keeping that love for humans at the same time as the love for everything else, because everything is connected. I don't think any one piece of the puzzle can be solved, with any missing piece, right? You can't, help humans if we don't respect the environment. We can't help humans if we don't respect animals, but it works the other way too. We're not gonna be able to help animals unless we also respect humans. These things are really, really intertwined, yeah, keep working with good people, and despite all the the difficult things, maintain your own happiness at the same time of doing these kind of things. It can be tough, but I think that's really, really important in the movement too. Like you say, everything's connected, and that's going to be an important ingredient. Difficult, but important ingredient, and easier for some, difficult for others. But let's just maintain that. So I can see that you have such a good vibe, and I hope that it spreads to all of us too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Like, really beautiful, parting comments. And I'll just say, I saw some post yesterday, and it was like, I didn't respond to it. It was like something on Facebook, but it was like, if aliens landed, like, who would be the best human representative for them to talk to or something? And I was like, stumped. I would nominate you.
That's pretty high praise. I don't know.
But really, I think it is that message of it all being connected, and that it really has to, our work for justice and compassion and respect, it has to apply to all beings, and the environment. And I think that is the heart of it. And to marry that intention and ethic with all of the knowledge that you have is just really powerful, and heartening, and gives me hope. And so thank you.
It's all teamwork. I don't think I'm a big player in this whole thing, but I think that we all work together, right? And so it's I don't think it's any one person that solves the problem. It's really teamwork, and ultimately we have to team up with everybody that we also don't necessarily agree with, right? And work together on doing something better together, right? And I just think that's all important. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, I guess I'll let you guys go. Thanks so much for the invitation. I hope that the video can be shared and that people will get benefit from it. And I'm sure I'll see you in person one day too.
Yes, I hope so.
Right.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for joining and for watching. And I know when we do these as webinars, we don't get to see the people who are joining, which is unfortunate. And I know that you're all doing amazing work, and I know some of you, and I know the amazing work that you're doing and all of the heart that you're putting into everything. And just grateful to be connected to all of you. So thank you again for doing the presentation. We appreciate it so much. Thank you for everybody for joining. And we will post the video on the website and on YouTube, and hopefully see everybody next month for our next conversation, going undercover in the industry with 2 of Animal Outlook's undercover investigators. So that'll be a really powerful conversation to have as well. So thank you everybody so much. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
And keep doing your good work. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.